Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Heaven Official's Blessing. We are on chapter 45 today. Thanks for joining us, Jeff, Liz, other folks. To give a quick summation of where we are in the story, last time our poor hero, Xie Lian, was having a issue where he had been tasked with investigating a crime, we'll call it that, that possibly his love interest was involved in. Unfortunately, it came to a head. His teammates ended up fighting against his love interest, and they parted on kind of what seemed like bad terms. Xie Lian is really kind of a little bit upset and kind of nervous about all that. It's true love when you burn their house down. So now they've returned to heaven to report on their mission, and suddenly one of their teammates, Lang Shangchu, has looked at Xie Lian and recognized him because of his sword work as the former Gyoshi, the teacher who taught him when he was younger and betrayed him. And that is about where we dropped off. So now we're going to come back in at the moment when they're discussing if Xie Lian is really this mysterious figure that Lang Changchu says he is. Chapter 45, The Black-Hearted Gyoshi, Gilded Banquet Awash in Blood. Feng Xin was the closest to the two, and he looked at Xie Lian with unconcealed shock. Mu Qing, on the other hand, had glowing eyes. The schooled shock had a hidden layer of excitement. Shi Qingxuan let go of Ming Yi and said, Changchu, do you misunderstand something? If His Highness was that Gyoshi Feng Xin, how would you not recognize him until now? Another voice rang out from the sidelines. Qingxuan, don't you know? Legend says the Gyoshi Feng Xin was proud, mysterious, and cold. He'd always worn a white gold mask, having never shown his real face to anyone. His Highness Taihua must never have seen his real looks. The one who spoke had his arms crossed and stood far on the sidelines. It was Pei Ming. Just seeing his face made Shi Qingxuan annoyed, and he swung his whisk. If that's the case, then no one's seen what the Gyoshi Feng Xin looked like. Why must General Pei make it sound like it's a sure thing His Highness Shan Li is the Gyoshi? When in action, Shi Qingxuan and Xie Lian were ridiculous and hilarious, but in the heavenly court they changed their composure, calm and poised, mindful of their behavior. Just then a snow-white silhouette appeared from the back chamber. The moment he arrived, everyone calmed down. The chattering officials all stood in their place, silencing their gossip, and bowed. Your Majesty. Jun Wu raised his hand slightly, and everyone straightened once more. He walked willfully, and as he passed by Xie Lian, he tapped on his right shoulder. The sleeve that was still dripping with fresh blood ceased immediately after the tap. After taking a moment to look over Ming Yi, Jun Wu stated, It's nothing serious. Settle the Earthmaster in. Thus, 4 famous medicinal heavenly officials came over to lift Ming Yi up and took him away. Shi Qingxuan looked as if he wanted to follow, but seeing the current tension in the Great Martial Hall, he couldn't not worry and decided not to go. With his hands behind his back, Jun Wu returned to the throne before speaking again. So tell me, what's happened now? Why won't Taihua let Xian Li go? And why is Xian Li bowing his head? Lang Shangchu glanced at Xie Lian. Seeing he was silent as they were surrounded by heavenly officials, there was no need to fear his escape, so Lang Shangchu released his hand and turned to bow to Jun Wu. My lord, many hundreds of years ago, this man altered his name to Feng Xin, slaughtered my clan, and brought ruin to my kingdom. I request a duel, and pray the Lord will be our judge. Within the Great Martial Hall, even ones who'd never heard the name Feng Xin ran to research the name within the communication array. What was uncovered was an astonishing tale. Good thing Ling Wen was present to answer everyone's query. The Gyoshi Feng Xin was the savior and teacher to the Crown Prince of Yong'an, Lang Shangchu. He was named one of the 2 wicked masters because of the infamous bloodbath that washed the gilded banquet of the Yong'an monarchy. What was the gilded banquet? Shi Qingxuan asked. "Lord Windmaster," Ling Wen replied, "the gilded banquet was a tradition passed down from the nobility of Shanli, and called thus because all cutlery, utensils, cups, and instruments were of the highest grade of gold, exquisite and luxurious. After the kingdom of Yong'an was established, at the beginning they announced to the world they would not follow the culture of excess from the old kingdom, and put all their focus on their people. Yet after a few decades, the old ways were relearnt, including the culture of excess." Ling Wen continued, "On the night of the 17th birthday of the Crown Prince of Yong'an, the palace threw a gilded banquet in celebration. The Gyoshi Fangshin, in that feast, with one sword in hand, slaughtered every member of the royal family in attendance. The golden goblets toppled, and blood spilt like wine. Only the Crown Prince of Yong'an escaped because of his late arrival to the feast. Otherwise, he too would have been annihilated. The coup d'etat was a huge blow to the foundation of Yong'an, and if it wasn't for Lang Chongchu, who had the people's heart and his hard work, there no doubt would have been a riot. It was with great difficulty the chaos was settled, and soon after the Yong'an monarchy released a bounty to pursue the fugitive murderer. At last, when he was captured, Lang Chongchu killed the evil Gyoshi Fangshin with his own 2 hands, sealed the corpse within a triple-layered coffin before sealing it again underground. However, the roots of the monarchy had been gravely damaged. Since then, it inevitably declined and was taken over by another clan in the end." Lang Chongchu glared at Xie Lian. "I never understood why you did what you did. You said you couldn't stand seeing us on the throne, but I didn't believe it, and I never thought you wanted to overthrow the monarchy and take our place. But now I finally know why." The heavenly officials had their eyes wide with shock, muttering to each other, "This is revenge! It couldn't be anything else. The kingdom of Xianli had fallen, so he had to ruin Yong'an too. Yong'an killed his royal parents, so he had to murder the royal parents of the crown prince. An eye for an eye, it's pure vengeance. But the ones who wiped out Xianli weren't of Lang Chongchu's generation. This rage was unreasonable. And here I thought the laughingstock of the 3 realms was a fool, but he's actually quite the aggressive character, going undercover in an enemy state, slaughtering the entire monarchy in one go. Incredible." Somehow it seems that will be way more complicated, don't you think, than it just he wanted to murder them for revenge. Hello, folks joining us. Xie Lian could feel Junwu's eyes on him and closed his own. He heard Junwu say, "Taihua, you firmly believe Shanli to be Fangshin, but do you have proof?" "The Gyoshi Fangshin was the one who taught me swordsmanship. How can I not recognize him the moment he strikes?" Lang Chongchu replied. The gossiping poured in like tides. Never mind making a mess of things. Isn't teaching the Crown Prince swordsmanship a little too extra? No wonder after the 3rd ascension we haven't seen him touch a single sword. He's afraid to show his tail. Lang Chongchu stated, "The last time I went to Ghost City and fought with Crimson Rain Sought Flower." The moment he mentioned Ghost City and Huacheng, many of the officials shivered again in fright, but Lang Chongchu continued. "When I was 12, there was once where I was kidnapped during an outing. The kidnappers dragged me down the streets, and when the guards caught up, they started brawling. A street performer was dragged in, and bruised as he was, he intercepted the fight with but a tree branch, and easily rescued me with a few swings. The kidnappers and the guards both suffered grave damages, and it was this street performer who escorted me all the way back to the palace. Out of immense gratitude, His Majesty my father and the Queen my mother fervently tried to retain him, and discovered his skills in swordsmanship, and so he was ultimately invited to become the Gyoshi. He taught me the way of the blade for 5 years. I'm more than familiar with his style. How can I be wrong?" "Your Highness Taihua," Mu Qing said faintly, "your saying that you saw was but a shadow, and other than you, no one has seen it. All of this is only by your word." Mu Qing's argument sounded like it was in Xie Lian's favor, but it was actually more complex. He'd already seen Lang Chongchu wouldn't let this go, and the more he was questioned, the more he would prove himself. Not the least bit helpful to Xie Lian's situation. Sure enough, Lang Chongchu demanded, "Fine, bring me a sword." There were many martial gods within the hall that carried swords, and hearing his call, there was immediately one thrown towards him. Lang Chongchu caught it and forced it in front of Xie Lian. "Take it. We'll duel now without holding back, using everything we've got and see whether we have the same style, whether I was taught by you." Everyone thought to duel in the great martial hall was a reckless act, but with the gilded banquet, a crown prince's entire family slaughtered in cold blood, they could understand why he was this agitated. Xie Lian's injury was still on Shi Qingxuan's mind, and he said, "Cheng Chu, His Highness blocked that attack from Hua Cheng for you and injured his arm like this. How can he duel you?" Hearing this, Lang Chongchu suddenly extended his left palm and smacked heavily upon his own right arm. There was a loud crack, and a mist of blood spurted from his entire arm from the shoulder, bleeding profusely. The limb fell limp. There wasn't any need to check to understand if it was a heavy injury. Everyone was shocked. This boy is so extra. Xie Lian was also taken aback and raised his eyes. "What are you doing?" "The Lord Windmaster was right," Lang Chongchu said. "You did injure your arm saving me, and so I return an arm to you. But saving me is one thing. Killing my clan is the undeniable truth. I know you're dexterous and can use a sword with either arm without lessening your skills. We'll duel with our left. Pick up the sword if you're a man." Xie Lian looked to the sword, then looked at him and finally shook his head slowly. "I've sworn many years ago to never kill with the sword again." With those words, Lang Chongchu recalled that night when he finally arrived at the feast. The scene of the black-robed man pulling out a longsword from the dead body of his parents. His eyes reddened with madness, the sword in his left hand emitting a shaking, crackling sound from his left grip. Shi Qingxuan swung out the whisk again, and it wrapped around the sword to hold it down. "I think there might be some sort of misunderstanding here. If the Gyoshi Fengxin had always worn a mask, then anyone could have pretended to be him to commit murder. What does my lord think?" Everyone turned their gaze to the jaded throne. "Xian Li," Zhenwu spoke. "Yes, my lord?" Xie Lian bowed. "Do you concede to Tai Hua's accusations?" Zhenwu asked. "I concede," Xie Lian replied. The "I concede" was uttered in a frosty tone, very unlike Xie Lian's usual manner of speaking, and the faces of Feng Xin, Mu Qing, and Shi Qingxuan all dropped. Zhenwu nodded and asked, "The Gyoshi Feng Xin who spilt blood upon the gilded banquet, was it you?" After a moment of silence, Xie Lian raised his head, determined. "That's right, it was me." Words of steel with no turning back. "So you admit it? Very good," Lang Chongchu said. As mentioned previously, there were innumerous heavenly officials with mortal blood on their hands in the upper court, but truthfully there hadn't been that many who had their blood debt escalate to this point. Might be because those mortals didn't have someone like Lang Chongchu in the family who could ascend and demand justice from the heavens. Before, Pei Su had General Pei as a shield, but in the end even he couldn't escape exile. Xie Lian had no one behind him. So now it would all depend on whether Zhenwu still valued past affections and held the heart to protect him. Yet many still couldn't fathom the attitude Zhenwu held towards Xie Lian. The first ascension, the crown prince of Xianli, was of course treated with the utmost favor. The second ascension, the two had a huge fight, and Xie Lian even stabbed Zhenwu a few times before he was defeated. This third ascension, the two had been at peace with each other, as if past conflicts had been forgotten, and Zhenwu even built a palace for Xie Lian in the nicest area of the heavenly capital. It was truly difficult to understand. Now everyone had their ears attentive, waiting eagerly to hear how the Lord would sentence Xie Lian. However, before Zhenwu had a chance to pass the verdict, Xie Lian spoke up first. "Xie Lian has a presumptuous request." "What is it?" Zhenwu responded. "I humbly ask the Lord to remove my godhood and banish me to the mortal realm," Xie Lian said. Some of the heavenly officials were astonished and at the same time amazed. Of course no one wanted to be banished. It's not easy to ascend. To work so hard, to climb so high, only to fall. Just thinking about it felt rueful. To dare ask for banishment from Zhenwu was so straightforward. A lot of them couldn't do it. Some of the other heavenly officials didn't think much of it. After all, at this point it might be better to back off than fight to the death. Xie Lian had been banished twice already. A third time probably meant nothing to him. Maybe he was even used to it. Hey folks joining us, we are on chapter 45, somewhere in the middle. Lang Chongchu, on the other hand, objected. "I don't need you to banish yourself. Ascension happens because you have the skills. I only want a duel." "I don't want to fight you," Xie Lian said. "Why?" Lang Chongchu shouted. It's not like we've never fought before. Life or death, the outcome doesn't matter. Let's just put an end to this. Xie Lian said plainly, "No reason. Fight me and you will for sure die." Dun dun dun. Now we are on chapter 46. Chapter 46. Enraged Nanyang. Fistfight with Xuanzang. Although the words were an understatement, lightly said, it caused all those around to take in a harsh breath. Many had in their minds, "You're nothing more than a powerless rubbish god. How could you be so shameless to say to the one Lang Chongchu, martial god of the East, that if you fight he'll die for sure? What arrogance!" It was like the request for banishment was because fighting Lang Chongchu was beneath him. Pure bullshit. Yet Lang Chongchu didn't think his words were exaggerated at all. "I said life and death don't matter. I don't need you to let me off this easy." Xie Lian ignored him and reiterated his request to Zhan Wu. "Pray my lord banish me to the lesser realm." Aw, thank you for the support, Pablo. Shi Qingxuan suddenly raised his arm. "Wait! I have more to say!" "Speak, Windmaster," Zhan Wu said. "Everyone here seems to think His Highness Xianli spilt the blood of Yongyang royalty for revenge. But if it was revenge, why did he let the crown prince, His Highness Taihua, go? Logically, the one an avenger would want to cut down the most should be the crown prince himself. Am I wrong?" It wasn't that no one had thought of this detail, but no one had thought it necessary to voice it either. Now that the Windmaster took the lead, some of them nodded their heads in agreement. Shi Qingxuan continued. "His Highness and I haven't known each other for long, but I did see with my own eyes him fighting head-on against the scimitar Yiming in order to protect His Highness. Chongchu, if he regarded the Yongyang monarchy with hatred, why would he unnecessarily defend you against the blade?" Hearing that Xie Lian faced Yiming head-on, both Feng Xin and Mu Qin stared at Xie Lian. Around there were whispers saying, maybe he was feeling guilty. But Shi Qingxuan immediately raised his voice. "That was the weapon of misfortune, the cursed blade. So, I think this whole business is highly suspect. I'm envious that His Royal Highness has gained the Lord Windmaster's friendship to defend him so," Pei Ming said. "Too bad our little Pei wasn't as fortunate." "General Pei, don't muddy the waters," Shi Qingxuan said. "Can little Pei's case be compared? I saw him commit crimes with my own eyes, too, and heard with my own ears his admission of said crimes." "Then isn't that exactly the same as today?" Pei Ming argued. "His Highness Taihua saw him commit crimes and heard him admit to said crimes with his own ears. How is that any different?" Shi Qingxuan grew furious and was about to argue back when Xie Lian held him back. "Lord Windmaster, thank you. I am in your debt. But please, let this go." Shi Qingxuan himself hadn't thought of a good comeback against Pei Ming yet, so he only pointed at him, but no more words came out. I love Shi Qingxuan so much. Just imagine this whole, heavenly courtroom, and he's just in the corner going, I love him so much. Finally, Zhan Wu spoke, his tone tranquil. "Everyone, please, calm down." His voice wasn't particularly loud, very serene, yet everyone within the great martial hall heard his words clearly, and they all stood back in position. Once the hall quieted down, Zhan Wu spoke again. "Taihua, your actions have always been impulsive. When situations arise, one mustn't be rash. Listen calmly, assess, and then evaluate once you know the whole story." Lang Chongchu lowered his head to heed the lesson. Zhan Wu continued. "Xianli refuses to give us the full story, so his request for banishment is denied. He will be detained in the palace of Xianli, and I will personally interrogate him afterwards. Before then, the two of you shan't meet." It was a conclusion no one had expected. Zhan Wu actually shielded Xie Lian, the laughingstock of the three realms, who had no temples, no devotees, and no merits. Lang Chongchu was the martial god who ruled the East. If he was unhappy with the verdict, then what a losing business. Even then, Zhan Wu chose to shield Xie Lian. Did that mean he was still very much in favor? Thank you again, Pablo. It's very kind of you. Do we have more episodes of this one? I think one more episode of the show has gone up. I'll have to look. I think it comes on every Sunday, but I'm not sure. Many of the officials now saw where the wind was blowing, and decided mentally that from now on they wouldn't publicly mention the words laughingstock of the three realms. Shi Qingxuan let out a sigh of relief and loudly praised Jun Wu for his wisdom. Lang Shengchu, on the other hand, only stared at Xie Lian intently. Whatever the Lord wishes to question, go ahead and question, but whatever the conclusion, I will still duel him. Ah, you big dumb baby. With that, Lang Shengchu bowed to Jun Wu before he turned and left the hall. Jun Wu waved his hand, and a couple of martial officials came forward to take Xie Lian away. As they passed by Shi Qingxuan, Xie Lian spoke in a soft voice. Lord Windmaster, thanks for everything. But if you must help me, don't say anything more on my behalf. Can I ask you to do 2 things for me? Shi Qingxuan was still feeling bad about fanning the fire that burnt down Paradise Manor, and wished dearly that Xie Lian would ask him for anything. Whatever you need. The boy I settled in the side chambers, please take care of him, Xie Lian said. Nothing I can't do. What's the second thing? Shi Qingxuan said. If General Pei still wants to make things difficult for Ban Yue in the future, please help her out. Of course, Shi Qingxuan replied. I won't let Pei Ming get his way. Where is she? I've hidden her in a small pickle jar in my Puchi shrine. If you have the time, please air her out sometimes, Xie Lian said. After thanking the Windmaster, 2 heavenly officials brought Xie Lian to the palace of Shanli before courteously excusing themselves. Thanks for your hard work, Xie Lian bowed his head slightly. Stepping through the front gates, Xie Lian closed the doors behind him. Looking around as he expected, not just appearance-wise, all the facilities were exactly the same as his previous palace. Last time he passed by, he didn't enter, having never guessed that the first time he was to step foot in here would be due to detention. Not the best sign. But after so much excitement in the past few days, his heart was tired, and Xie Lian passed out immediately on the ground. He dreamt of many things. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed. When he blinked his eyes open, he found himself sitting in the lotus position before a desk, his black robes flowing on the floor in layers around him, and on his face there seemed to be a cold, heavy mask. When he lowered his head, the sight before him was of a young boy sprawled over the desk. The boy appeared to be 14 or 15 years of age, his attire distinguished, his form strumming with life, but fast asleep. He shook his head and walked over. Bending slightly, he knocked on the desk. Your Royal Highness. Maybe it was because of the cold mask, even his voice was cool. The boy finally woke with a start. When he raised his eyes and saw him, he sat upright immediately in horror. Kyoshi! He said. You fell asleep again. Copy the Ethics Sutra. I don't know why I said sutra. Copy the Ethics Scripture 10 times as punishment. The Crown Prince cried in dismay. Master, please, no. Why don't you have me run 10 laps around the palace? Copy 20 times. Do it now and write it nicely. The Crown Prince seemed to fear him and sat up properly to start writing. He then sat back at his original position and continued to meditate. Truthfully, everyone in the palace was a little scared of him, but this sense of distance and oppressive power was created intentionally by him. However, this Crown Prince may be too young, so he could never hold that sense of fear for long. Not long after he started copying, he called out, Master! He put down the book in his hand. What is it? I've become skilled in all the sword techniques you taught me last time. Isn't it time for a new technique? The Crown Prince said. All right, what do you want to learn? He said. I want to learn the technique you used to save me, the Crown Prince exclaimed. He contemplated for a bit and said, that one? No. Why? The Crown Prince asked. That technique is impractical. At least it's unsuitable for one in your position, he explained. The Crown Prince didn't understand. But isn't it convenient? Using one sword to dissolve the power of 2? You saved me with that technique. It was normal for the Crown Prince not to understand. He said, Your Royal Highness, let me ask you a question. Ask! He said, Once there were 2 people, eyes sunken red with hunger. They started fighting in order to rob each other for food. In came a 3rd person, and he wanted to stop the fight. Do you think words would be effective in this situation? No, it'd be useless. They only want food, right? That's right. Because the root of the problem wasn't solved, no one would listen to your reason. Thus, the only way this 3rd person can stop the fight would be to provide what was wanted, to give food from his own purse. The Crown Prince seemed to understand, but also seemed not to understand. He continued, "The reasoning is the same. You must understand that the moment a sword is unsheathed, someone will be hurt. When power is released, something must receive it. Thus, it was wrong for you to say, 'I dissolved the force of two swords.' Nothing was dissolved. I absorbed the attacks. To stop an attack by hurting oneself is a foolish technique, and only used when there are no other alternatives. You're an esteemed Crown Prince. You've no use for something of the sort." The Crown Prince continued to copy his scripture, but after a while looked contemplative. "Do you have any other questions?" After a moment of hesitation, the Crown Prince said, "One thing. Master, if the third person didn't have enough food, what should be done?" The Crown Prince continued, "If both the hungry had gotten food but wanted more, and fought harder because of greed, and sought more food from the third person, what should be done?" "What do you think?" he asked. The Crown Prince pondered and said, "I don't know. Maybe he shouldn't have intercepted from the start." Oof, we're headed towards some of the darker themes of this story. The great hall was gold. Everything was golden. However, at present it had all become crimson. At every golden banquet table there was sprawled a person. Throats were pierced, their deaths tragic. His hand that held the sword wouldn't stop shaking. The stately king was covered in blood, his eyes red, filled with pain and hatred. Next to his feet was the dead body of the queen. His sword in hand, he took one step after another and walked over. When the king raised his head and saw him, he was dumbfounded. "Gyoshi, you—" A severely cold and cruel sword struck. Right at the same time, he sensed something and turned his head immediately. The young Crown Prince was just outside the door, standing amidst the corpses of guards. The boy's eyes were blank, as if wondering what he saw was reality or dream. He took a step and almost tripped on the threshold, his mind lost. He pulled out his sword. Blood splattered onto his black robes. The Crown Prince didn't trip on the threshold, but tripped on the dead bodies on the ground. He rushed to the king's body, his voice finally returning. "Father! Mother!" Yet the king would never speak again. The Crown Prince couldn't shake him awake and whipped his head madly towards him, his eyes wide. "Master, what are you doing? What did you do? Gyoshi!" It was a long while before he heard his own voice, devoid of emotion. "You all deserved it." Shan Li didn't sleep well and rolled awake with a start. He sleepily rubbed his eyes and realized he didn't actually sleep that long, and didn't dream anything nice either. Good thing there was something on his chest that poked him awake. He sat for a while, then found something in his clothes after feeling around for it. He opened his palm and revealed 2 dice, the same ones from Paradise Manor. A sea of red floated in his mind. The scene was blurry, but that crimson silhouette was clear as day, watching him unmoving within the sea of red. Xie Lian sighed. "I wonder how much is left of San Lang's Paradise Manor. If I get banished again this time, who knows how much junk I'll have to sell, or how long it would take to pay him back. Decades, centuries. If anything, I'll pay him for the rest of my life." Xie Lian looked at the dice for a bit before clapping his hands closed, shaking them in his palms and tossing them to the ground. The dice rattled and rolled around the ground before coming to a stop. Are we streaming a game later? We're going to stream something. It may be a blog, because I have a small child that's bugging me and wants to stream something with us. We'll see. Let's see. The dice rattled and rolled around the ground before coming to a stop. As expected, all the luck he'd borrowed from Hua Cheng was used up. He was hoping for another roll of 6s, but it was only snake eyes. Xie Lian couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head and suddenly heard footsteps coming from behind. He steadied himself immediately and packed away both the dice and his smile. The footsteps didn't sound like Junwu. Junwu walked with deep certainty, unhurried. Although Hua Cheng walked with nonchalance, often lazy, the aura of confidence and surety were exactly the same. This set of footsteps, however, were a little floaty. Xie Lian turned his head and was taken aback. "It's you." The person before him was clad in black, his face fair and lips thin. His expression was indifferent, maybe even cool. As a martial god, he looked more like a civil god. Who else could it be but Mu Qing? He saw Xie Lian's startled expression and raised his brows. Who did you think, Feng Xin? Without waiting for a response, he lifted his black robes and crossed the threshold of the door. Feng Xin probably won't come after all. What are you doing here? Xie Lian asked. The Emperor detained you and won't let His Highness Taihua come, but he didn't say I couldn't come, Mu Qing said. He didn't bother answering Xie Lian's question. Whatever. Xie Lian wasn't actually curious anyway and didn't question him further. Mu Qing looked around the newly built palace of Xianli, his eyes ending up on Xie Lian. After some thought, he suddenly threw something at him. A blue shadow flashed in the air. Xie Lian caught it with his left hand, and when he opened his palm, it was a small blue porcelain bottle. It was a bottle of medicine. Mu Qing said apathetically, Dragging around a bloody right arm doesn't look good. Xie Lian held the bottle but didn't move, and watched him instead, discerningly. After his third ascension, there could only be one word to describe the way Mu Qing treated him. Weird. It always felt like he was waiting for Xie Lian to get booted for the third time so he could make sneering remarks. Yet now that Xie Lian might actually get booted for the third time, he suddenly became friendly and came to gift him medication. This 180-degree change in attitude made Xie Lian feel a little weird. Seeing that Xie Lian wasn't moving, Mu Qing smirked faintly. Use it if you want. Either way, no one else is coming. It wasn't a smile without mirth. It was obvious he was actually feeling pretty good. Although Xie Lian didn't think his right arm was in pain, there was no reason to leave the injuries either. The pat from Jun Wu was a quick fix. It was better to have medication. Thus he opened the small blue bottle and carelessly started pouring the contents onto his arm. What came out of the bottle wasn't powder or pill, but a light blue smoke. The smoke floated wildly, wrapping around his arm, its scent cool and refreshing. It was certainly a high-grade item. Mu Qing suddenly asked, Was everything Lang Chongshu said true? Did you really kill all those Yong'ang royals? Xie Lian raised his eyes to look at him. Even if Mu Qing had been forcibly hiding it, Xie Lian could still see a thread of uncontrollable excitement in his eyes. He seemed to be highly interested in the details of Xie Lian spilling blood at the gilded banquet and continued his questions. How did you kill them? Just then another set of footfalls came from behind them. The two turned their heads at the same time, and the one visiting this time was Feng Xin. The moment he entered, he saw Mu Qing in the main hall, smiling next to a crouching Xie Lian, and immediately frowned with alarm. What are you doing here? Xie Lian waved the little bottle in his hand. Mu Qing schooled his expression. He was just saying Feng Xin wouldn't be coming, and Feng Xin arrived the next second. Not funny at all. This isn't your palace. What? You can come, but I can't, Mu Qing rebutted. Feng Xin ignored him and turned to Xie Lian. He hadn't even opened his mouth, and Xie Lian spoke up. If the two of you came to ask me the same question, I will give you one answer. There's no need to not believe. Every word I said at the Great Martial Hall today was true. Feng Xin paled. Mu Qing hated that expression, and said in annoyance, All right, put that face away. After everything, who are you looking pained for? Feng Xin glared at him. Not for you. Get out. And who are you to tell me to get out? Mu Qing said, speaking as if you're so loyal. How many years did you last again? Didn't you run away too? Veins popped all over Feng Xin's face. Xie Lian could sense the exchange was going in the wrong direction and raised his hand. Hold it, hold it. As if Mu Qing was the type to hold it back, he sneered. Everyone says it was because you couldn't stand seeing your old master fall from grace. What a petty excuse. At the end of the day, you just didn't want to waste the rest of your days following a broken man. Feng Xin swung out his fist. What the fuck do you know? Bam! Feng Xin's fist landed squarely on Mu Qing's face. Mu Qing was a standard pretty boy. A bashing punch from Feng Xin was like a persimmon smashed on his face, bloody and miserable. Yet he stood his ground and without even a whine punched right back. When the two ascended, they both obtained their own spiritual devices. Yet at the height of anger, the best tool to release their rage was their fists. When Feng Xin and Mu Qing fought 800 years ago, their martial arts were at the same level. After 800 years, there was still no difference. Each punch landed. The brawl was messy and mad, each holding their Feng Xin cried angrily. "Don't think I don't know your nasty thoughts. The more crimes he commits, the happier you become." Mu Qing spat. "I knew you always looked down on me. What a joke! Look at yourself. What right do you have to look down on me? The pot calling the kettle black." Lang Chongchu and Xie Lian hadn't even started dueling, and Feng Xin and Mu Qing were already brawling. Their grudges had been building for a long time. The fight was uncontrolled and riotous, each cussing at the other without hearing what was cussed back, and they certainly had no mind to hear anything Xie Lian had to say. Xie Lian recalled back when the three of them were younger. Mu Qing had been soft-spoken and well-mannered, and if Feng Xin had hit anyone, it was under Xie Lian's command, and he'd stop when Xie Lian said stop. Neither was the case now. Dragging his arm, Xie Lian ran towards the door, hoping to call for help from any nearby officials, but before he even stepped foot out of the main hall, there was a huge, loud bang that exploded from the front. Feng Xin and Mu Qing were shocked by the large noise and stopped, their eyes alert, looking to where the sound came from. The front doors to the palace of Xianli had been kicked open by someone. Beyond the door wasn't the expansive Great Martial Avenue of the Heavenly Court, but a dead, deep blackness. And from within the darkness, innumerous, chilling silver butterflies rushed out towards them. Who could that be? I wonder who it could be. Who's here to save the day? Chapter 47. Raiding a Heavenly Palace. 3 lines to scare all the gods. Silver shimmered turbulently. Without thinking, Xie Lian's first reaction was to block with his hand. The Roroi on his arm, if the situation called for it, would attack automatically. Yet the silver butterflies never charged towards him. Instead, they flew around to attack the two behind who were fist-fighting just moments ago. Feng Xin and Mu Qing suffered before at the hands of those wraith butterflies. They knew how powerful they were and didn't dare be careless. They both raised their hands at the same time and cried, "Shield!" Millions of silver butterflies jetted towards them, flapping their wings like blasted winds, but there was an invisible wall blocking them, and the butterflies smashed against it like a thunderstorm, hailing and battering. White lights flared from the friction like sparks. It appeared the two had cast a spell to shield, but even against a magical shield, the wraith butterflies were forceful and endless, crazy like moths to flames. Even with a spiritual defense, the two seemed to be pushed back by the relentless deluge of butterflies. A moment of carelessness, and the enemy took the upper hand. If they didn't release the shield, the butterflies would push closer. If they did, there'd be no chance for them to grab their weapons. But Feng Xin and Mu Qing mentally swore, gritting their teeth to hang on. Feng Xin took a glance and saw Xie Lian was still standing where he was, his head lowered, and shouted to him, "Your Highness, don't stand there! Come behind the shield!" Yet when Xie Lian turned his head, not a single hair was harmed. He frowned. "Huh?" The two looked closely and almost spat blood from angry shock on the spot. Xie Lian had in his hand a wraith butterfly, looking rather confused. Earlier, when the butterflies were gusting through like wild winds, there was one that was a little slow and couldn't follow. It flapped with difficulty in front of Xie Lian. He thought it worked really hard, but the poor little butterfly couldn't fly anymore, so he extended his palm just beneath it. The silver butterfly landed on his palm, wings still flapping, but refused to leave. Oh my god, he just took such cute pity on the little demon butterfly. Oh, I love it. Both Feng Xin and Mu Qing popped veins. "Don't touch that thing with your hand!" Just then, Xie Lian felt a tightening on his wrist. Someone had gotten a hold of him, and pulled hard. His entire person was pulled into the darkness beyond the door. Yet, although he was shrouded in the dark, he didn't feel any alarm or insecurity. The darkness was like a layer of gentle armor. Not only did he not sense danger, it actually somehow calmed him down. Even if the person behind the darkness hadn't shown himself, with the silver butterflies, would it be hard to guess who it was? Mu Qing cried in disbelief. "What impudence to come all the way to the heavenly court! What arrogance!" A voice laughed. "We're all the same. Wasn't the upper court impudent in my territory?" Even if Xie Lian already knew who it was that grabbed him, hearing the familiar voice so close, he was still a little startled. Feng Xin shouted, "Hua Cheng, Heavenly Martial Emperor is here in the Heavenly Court. You let him go!" Hua Cheng clicked his tongue. "Then let's see if you have the skill." As he finished his words, the giant doors closed heavily with a bang. Xie Lian could feel Hua Cheng holding him tightly with one hand, taking him to an unknown destination. It was black all around them, and the silver bells on the black boots clinged and clanged in his ears. The ground beneath their feet was uneven. It really wasn't the bright, glorious roads of heaven, more so a wild valley. Hua Cheng must have used the distance shortening array to connect the front gates of the palace of Jianli to some valley, but to connect the heavenly court to somewhere else using the array was no easy feat. At least only a handful of heavenly officials could do so. How could he have done it? Xie Lian was about to speak when a voice exploded in his ear. "Your Highness, where are you?" The angry roar came from Feng Xin. His voice was in his ear, but his person was not. It was all shouted within the communication array. Xie Lian's eardrums hurt from the noise, and many of the heavenly officials were also blasted out, asking questions in fright. "What's going on, General Nanyang? Did something happen?" Mu Qing entered the communication array. "Bad news! Where's Ling Wen? Report to the Emperor. Xie Lian's escaped." He usually spoke gently and courteously, but now his voice was laced with worry and anxiety. Ling Wen reacted immediately. "What? I'll go to the palace of Shanli to take a look." An official cried in shock. His Royal Highness ran away? Wasn't he detained in the palace of Shanli?" Shi Qing Xuan entered the communication array too. "I just saw a bunch of middle court martial guards guarding the palace. You can only enter but not leave, so how could he escape?" Feng Xin shouted, "He didn't run away! He was kidnapped! Your Highness, can you still hear us speak? Where are you now?" In that moment, everyone spoke, and they all talked loudly, each asking for answers. The mess of the Gyoshi Feng Xin and Lang Chongchu hadn't even cleared yet. Zhen Wu detained Xie Lian, but the person in question was gone. Wasn't this starting more problems and gossip? Either way, they must find the person first, so Ling Wen rushed to check the situation, to see if she could locate Xie Lian. Feng Xin and Mu Qing were yelling within the array, looking for skilled martial gods to give chase, and Shi Qing Xuan released many more waves of merits. The communication array was in complete chaos and tumultuous, to the point where Xie Lian couldn't get a word in. He took a deep breath and was about to tell everyone to calm down when Hua Cheng suddenly turned around and 2 fingers came forward. These cold digits gently touched his temple, and Hua Cheng laughed. "Long time no see. How's everyone doing?" With the soft touch of 2 fingers, Hua Cheng entered the heavenly communication array through Xie Lian. His casual greeting was heard not just by Xie Lian, but all the heavenly officials hustling within the communication array, and they all fell into a dead silence. There was a silent uproar in everyone's minds. No wonder, such arrogance could only come from that person. Hua Cheng continued, "I don't know if any of you missed me, but I haven't thought about any of you at all." There were indeed many heavenly officials in the heavens who secretly thought about him every day, but hearing that Hua Cheng didn't think about them at all, they all chanted heavenly blessings. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please continue to never think of us." Then Hua Cheng snickered. "However, I've been fairly free recently. If anyone's feeling bored and wants to tussle with me, by all means, you're welcome to." Under the circumstances, his intent was more than obvious. If anyone is brave enough to give chase, I'll challenge them. It'd be a challenge they were sure to lose and have their faces sweep the floor. Wasn't this a blatant threat? Earlier, when they heard Xie Lian ran away or was kidnapped, the array roared to life. It was, after all, a rare riot, and all cared deeply. Some martial gods were ready to heed the call, prepared to give chase. However, with only 3 lines from Hua Cheng, all such passion disappeared. If Zhen Wu gave command to send whoever to pursue, it couldn't be helped, it'd be official business. But this was something that just happened. Everything was still a mess. Naturally, no one wanted to bring trouble to themselves. No one wanted Hua Cheng to remember them. Thus, they all pretended they weren't present, but their ears were attentive to the development of the situation, their hearts anxious and shaking. This crimson rain-sought flower was overly fearless, to come all the way to the heavens just to kidnap, and the kidnapped was the laughingstock of the 3 realms? Was there some deeply rooted grudge, or what? Silence befell the communication array. Only Feng Xin continued to swear, and Hua Cheng removed his fingers after making his speech. "Don't mind them," he said to Xie Lian. San Lang, Xie Lian blurted, but Hua Cheng let go of his hand. We're too close to the heavenly court. Let's hurry, Hua Cheng said. His voice was low and his tone hard to discern. Yet letting go of Xie Lian's wrist was swift, almost as if he was shaken off. Xie Lian was immediately reminded of the first time they met, and how he evaded his touch. Xie Lian froze on the spot. He originally wanted to ask Hua Cheng why it appeared so suddenly. Although he didn't think deeply about it, he sort of felt maybe he'd come to rescue him. So when he called out San Lang just now, he was a little happy. But with how Hua Cheng shook off his hand, Xie Lian suddenly realized, why did he think Hua Cheng would come rescue him? Never mind thinking whether Hua Cheng cared to follow his actions that closely. He'd only just escaped Ghost City after setting Paradise Manor on fire. It was more likely Hua Cheng came knocking for paybacks, for revenge. Hua Cheng caught, imprisoned, and interrogated the Lord Earthmaster, who went undercover as a spy. That was the undeniable truth. But the fault naturally laid with the one who went undercover. Yet he snuck into Ghost City, burrowed all over Paradise Manor to find said person, and set a fire. Even if in the end the reason Paradise Manor burnt the way it did was because Shi Qingxuan fanned the flames, the first kindle in the armory was started by him. Others might not have thought of setting anything on fire, so no matter what, Xie Lian needed to take responsibility. The two walked one behind the other. The more Xie Lian thought, the worse he felt, and the guiltier he became. San Lang, I'm sorry, he apologized. Hua Cheng suddenly paused in his step. Why are you apologizing? Xie Lian stopped too. I went to the Ghost City to investigate the missing Earthmaster. I didn't tell you the truth, and yet you cheated me with the utmost hospitality. Then I burnt down your Paradise Manor. I feel really bad. Hua Cheng didn't say anything. Xie Lian also knew that I felt really bad didn't amount to much, and felt even more ashamed. He lightly cleared his throat. But I reckon I'll be banished soon. After I descend, I'll for sure think of a way to repay you, see if I could. Why do you have to repay me? Hua Cheng interrupted. His tone was a little hard, as if he couldn't listen anymore, and he turned around in a fit. Did you forget that my blade wounded your arm? I hurt you, not the other way around. Why do you have to repay me? Xie Lian never thought his right arm was in pain, and even now he'd completely forgot his right hand was injured. He paused, then said, My right arm? My right arm's fine. It'll be better soon. Besides, it's only like this because I rushed forward to strike, so you're not to blame. Hua Cheng watched him intently, his left eye unusually bright. Xie Lian suddenly noticed he appeared to be shaking. After a moment, Xie Lian realized it wasn't Hua Cheng who was shaking, but the scimitar aiming on his waist. The silver scimitar hung upon the red robes was shaking nonstop. The eye, contoured to a silver line, was also trembling. If it was the eye of a child, then this child, at this moment in time, must be bawling with tears. They both are just so worried about the fact that they hurt the other one, and they're so sad about it, and they're so bad at communicating. Oh my god. And poor Hua Cheng is... the sword, for reasons we will learn later, the sword very much represents what he's actually feeling secretly. It's kind of a connection to him. And the sword is so upset because he's so upset that he hurt his Gege. And then, of course, Xie Lian's just like, I burned his house down. I'm so horrible. They're both just like, I'm so horrible. He hates me. God, this whole scene is just so freaking cute. I really love it. Let's see, how long is this one? Yeah, I think we're going to have to call it there, because we're up on an hour. My voice is still a little hoarse from reading for 3 hours yesterday. But we will continue next time with that short, adorable, and sad scene. We will end there. Thank you for listening. Still working on a bunch of changes and stuff. Members content should be available through the new card that's in the description. I'm still posting things to the playlist, so they may not all be there yet. Updating some stuff there. If you like what I do and want to support it, links in the description. You can get lots of bonus content, and I'm working on posting more. I'll be back in a little bit. to do something with the mini-me, I think. She's very sad that she didn't get to do anything yesterday. Follow me on social media, join the Discord if you want to hang out, watch TV with us. We watch the Heaven Official's Blessing TV show and the other stuff, like Scumbag System, Untamed, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna put a poll in the Discord for members today or tomorrow to pick out what story we're gonna start reading on Friday since we finished Silmarillion. I'm gonna replace The Ring with Demon City Shinjuku because I really want to read some Hideyuki Kikuchi with you. It's a horror story. It's the first book he ever wrote, and it's very Shin Megami Tensei. Very, very Shin Megami Tensei. It's a great book, and it's got a movie we'll watch eventually. I think that's it, so I'll be back pretty soon with more stuff. Thanks again to all of our members like Kohi and Jeff and Delvin and Pablo. You're all amazing and I love you. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!